Chelsea Pelche. Well, thanks, Bree. My name is Chelsea Pelche. I'm one of the members of the team who organizes this seminar series, along with Dr. Sarah Gray and Margot Parks. And then we also receive great admin support from Bree and Rachel at the HRI. So I will be chairing today's session. And so I have a couple slides to review first, and then we'll have the presenters. And then at the end, a little bit of a Q&A. So during the talk, please feel free to pop your questions into the chat box, and I'll sort of moderate that with the speakers at the end of the talk. So just before we get started, we want to thank our contributors and our sponsors that enable us to deliver this seminar series. So from UNBC, the School of Health Sciences, Nursing and Social Work, as well as the Psychology Program and the Northern Medical Program, and also Sun Life Financial. So if you have any questions about the seminar series in general, or better yet, if you're interested in presenting, please reach out to our Health Research Institute, either Bree Loffer or on our website, where you can find the schedule of upcoming seminars, the archive of the previous seminars we've hosted, and also the video presentations or recordings of the talk. And today's talk will also be available in a couple days. So today, before I introduce today's speakers, I'll just remind everyone that our next seminar is on December 10th, and we will be hearing from Dr. Tammy Klassen-Ross, who is an assistant professor in the School of Health Sciences. So we hope you are all able to attend. And Bree has reminded us that you can follow on social media sites if you want to hear more information about the schedule. And check again on the HRI website for details on that. And I see someone's commenting in the chat. Yes, all attendees are muted. So if you do have a question or comment, please feel free to post it in the chat, and we can bring it up with the speakers. So as we just get started, and I think Bree will transition the slides, it is my pleasure to introduce our two speakers today. So Dr. Annie Duchesne is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at UNBC. Dr. Duchesne obtained her PhD in neuroscience from McGill University in 2014, where she studied the effects of ovarian hormones on stress responses. She pursued research in neuroendocrinology at the University of Toronto, looking at the impact of ovarian hormone suppression on cognition. Dr. Duchesne's primary research interest is in understanding how hormones regulate behaviors differently across different situations and individuals. Dr. Duchesne's research has implications in the fields of health, neuroscience, and cognition. And our second speaker is Anita Shah, who is a PhD candidate in social psychology at UNBC. Her dissertation research is conducted with supervisor Dr. Lorraine Lavallee, which investigates the relationship among sexual objectification, dehumanization, and women's sexual agency. So I will hand the virtual microphone over to our two speakers and look forward to their talk.
Unmute first, it's always a good start. I'll be sharing my screen. I guess I have the ability to do that. Yes, I do. This is lovely. Okay, and then I'm actually just gonna start my presentation. Okay, so do you see, oh, this is very strange. Do you see presenter view now, or you see do you see, oh.
We can see your slides, Annie.
Okay, perfect. Okay, just I have, oh, this is great actually. Okay, so basically the way, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks a lot to the HRI for hosting our talk. So we're gonna have a dual talk with me and Anita, and it's our pleasure to introduce you a new-ish network that we have here at UNBC, and in the hope that you may actually be interested in joining us if you are students or if you are a supervisor who do have students and that could have interest in this network. So I'm actually just gonna walk you through the brief overview. I just want to make sure, now that I'm talking, that I'm just being heard clearly before, because sometimes it happens that I was choppy before. Is it clear? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So just the way this talk's going to go, we're going to start with just a brief overview about CIHR-IGH and what is the role of this institute in, I would say, in providing support, but also allowing innovation in the realm of sex and gender and health. Then we're going to talk about the trainee network, how it's organized in general, what has been happening with this network so far, then just focusing more on our chapter here at UNBC, introducing me and Anita in the context of this network, what are our role and actually why do we have the expertise or interest to convey within this network, and then just talking more broadly who could be interested in partaking in the network, and then just basically talking about some possible events that's going to be organized, and yeah, just leaving you on, I guess, little activities, a little suggestion for activities, and then definitely opening the floor for questions. So that's how we're going to go. So basically, I just want to, oops, sorry. And it might, again, because I feel like I'm expecting that people on this, attending this talk, a lot of you are students, undergrad, grad, and some of you are supervisors, but I think it's important to just start with what is CIHR and just provide a bit of an overview of how actually the Institute of Gender and Health is situated more broadly within CIHR. So what is the Institute for Gender and Health within the Canadian Institute of the Canadian Health Institute? So basically, this is the I would say depiction of the Canadian Institutes with an S for health research. So here you see there are 13 institutes, and if we're just walking through it, and I think I'm trying to find if I have a little, I realize how much I'm actually, oh yeah, perfect. So I guess if I'm, okay, this is lovely. So just I want to draw attention on the fact that of those 13 institutes, you can see that basically there are some institutes which the focus is literally on a physiological system. So musculoskeletal, circulatory and respiratory, nutrition, metabolism, neuroscience and mental health and addiction. So you have, again, infection and immunity. So you have institutes that are dedicated to a specific physiological system and the health that pertain to those systems, but you also have other institutes that are actually what I would say more cross-cutting across the different health systems or physiological health systems. And here you have aging, genetics, Aboriginal people health, public and population health, and gender and health. And then you can see that, again, the fact that you have this balance between institutes that are conveying more, I would say, of maybe that are coming more from a biomedical frame of health. You also have other institutes that are maybe rooted in a framework that it's a bit more broad and rooted a bit more in a biopsychosocial model or an eco-social model of health. And but what is important is that those institutes, and I would say in particular the institute that are cross-cutting, are interacting with a lot of the other institutes. So yes, if you didn't know, the CIHR more or less invests about $1 billion per year in health research. And so it's a lot of money that is invested in a lot of very important projects and research teams. And actually, you can see also the way, I would say, the health research within the CIHR Institute are constructed by the type of teams. And you have biomedical, clinical, populational, environmental, and for some reason I'm blanking on the other one, but there's also this division when you're looking at, and I would say to this date, still the vast majority of funding goes to biomedical. So it's important maybe to mention that CIHR, although again, it really changes in its framework for health, still operates within or massively supports biomedically oriented research. So now that I just give you, I would say, a mini institutional, I would say, landscape of what CIHR, let's just go. So here we have the Institute for Gender and Health, but what is gender? And again, I feel this is something, it's a question that often when I'm talking about sex and gender pertaining to health, it's a question that I ask quite often, and I can really see, and I think this is probably one of a very good outcome and probably of some of the activity or initiatives taken by the Institute for Gender and Health, is that how actually students and trainee are getting more and more equipped and literate when it comes to navigating the concepts of sex and gender and how it could pertain to health research. So the definition I will be using today is the definition that actually comes from the Institute for Gender and Health. So when, but I just want to maybe be clear that the definition of gender study is a field in its own. So the definition of gender could vary depending on a specific position or specific theory. So this is a definition, it's a common definition, but by no means it is the definition. So I just want to make sure that this is clear. So socially constructed roles, behavior, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender diverse people. So how do we think about basically those socially constructed roles, behavior, and expression? And here you have some depiction in the image. So again, we're talking about you can have occupation, you can have a role in caring for children, you can have actually certain laws, how laws are developed and how they might be developed differently based on gendered assumptions, stereotypes, or discrimination, the way we perceive modes of communication, how actually elements such as the way we dress, the way we project ourselves. Also, all these constructs could vary based on a specific culture, on a specific context. So how actually gender might be expressed could be different. And yes, so these are, I would say, some facets of the multi-dimensional and multi-layered concept and construct of gender. So I would say going side by side to the concept of gender is the concept of sex, which here, and again, is and I would say is more, I would say, consistently defined as biological attributes of human and animal, including physical feature, chromosomes, gene expression, hormones, and anatomy. So you have, again, here a lot of, you have animals that are represented, cells, again, because you can conceptualize that sex, if you refer to chromosomal sex, that basically a cell could be of a certain sex, if you identify sex on a chromosome level. You also, again, we refer a lot on sex differences when it comes to hormonal differences, and particularly the secretion of gonadal hormones, so hormones from the gonads. But I think that another nuance I want to just bring forward is this idea of dichotomous versus different. And often when we think about sex variables, so if I take the example, which is an example I'm very familiar with, of ovarian hormones or gonadal hormones, so estrogens, testosterone, progesterone. Often they are considered to be dichotomous, so that often people overly associate women or female, or I would say female more so than women, to have higher levels of estrogens and progesterone. While on the counterpart, people will associate male organism with higher level of testosterone or with only level of testosterone. But again, those levels, those hormones are found in both organisms, in all organisms that are, so to speak, sexed, and their levels can vary and can be very comparable depending on a certain state. So sometimes here we're talking about some sex differences, not sex dichotomy. When we're talking about dichotomous, it could be in the expression of genitalia, for instance. That could be seen more as the distribution is completely separate, the presentation of some organs. But here again, it's very important to think that there is, and it's more common, I feel that it's been depicted in the history of health. There are individuals who are intersex. So even in traits that are considered dichotomous, there is not such a thing as a complete dichotomous sexually related variable. So these are, again, I would say just some basis some basis related to those constructs. One last thing that I would like to say about this is how actually, and it might be something you've seen across the literature, and maybe you're already familiar with this, is when we're talking about individual, and we're talking about often individual, and in particular, when we're talking about humans, we'll use the depiction sex/gender or gender/sex, especially when we're talking about differences between men and women that we have not actually, that we cannot attribute to specific gender-related variables or to sex-related variables. So when we're just looking at, basically, we found differences between men and women, often we will consider those differences as possibly related to sex/gender, because in this context, they are indissociable. You cannot dissociate them. So often people will prefer to use sex and gender differences when they're talking about a difference between self-identifying men and women. Okay, so this is just so that we have basically a common ground when we're thinking about those constructs. Okay. So why do gender and sex matter to health research? I think this is a fair question, and because these questions could actually take not only one talk in of itself, but a series of talks. So what I've done here, I've just brought to you, and this is, again, it's coming from the Institute, but it's this beautiful series of facts sheets that they brought together to really showcase where can sex and gender be expressed. And so you can just see by going through this how varied the question can be. And so for instance, we have opioid education, why sex and gender matter, and you have sex and gender in the microbiome, the sex and gender matter in post-traumatic stress disorder. Is depression in men overlooked? So these are all different topics, and you can see that they are really cutting across, I would say, most of the dimension of health, and really, I would say, demonstrating how important and how wide adopting, I would say, sex and gender critical lens is to maybe better understand the phenomenon you want to study and ultimately improve the health of the population you're interested in. So while I'm saying this, I think it's important also to think about how, when we're trying to study or consider sex and gender in health research, that we're not solely after the search for difference or the search for differential explanation or revealing a difference that hasn't been found before. Well, actually, some of the work in sex and gender might be the other way around, might be actually critically looking at an over-amplified sex differences. So I think it's important to think that the field of sex and gender research is about, yes, maybe discovering how individual differences and how gender and sex-related construct might be important, but also in places that it might be actually over-amplified. And for this, I just have a specific example. And this example is coming from a great resources that's called Gender Innovation. I put just the link below. And it's just, again, this case study about arthroplasty. And again, I am by no means a knee surgeon, but I think this case is really revealing the importance of, as they call it here, de-gendering the knee, and how actually in that case, it was important to revisit and overemphasize sex differences that became a problem. And just to put it in context, actually arthroplasty is a surgery, a knee replacement surgery that is done in more women. Actually 2/3, I think, of the patient are women. So there's here are differences between who is getting this surgery. But what has happened is that these differences started to lead into maybe getting a gender-specific type of prosthesis. So basically trying to look for maybe gender differences and promoting a type of prosthesis that would be more adequate for a woman's knee anatomy. And that led to further research to try to find or characterize maybe the distinct anatomy in the knee between men and women. But what is important is that while this development of specific, I would say, prosthesis for women was really pushed forward, there was not a lot of clinical validation as if those prostheses were actually working or had actually better clinical outcome in women, for one. And second, when looking further into what was the supposedly anatomical differences in the knee of between men and women, most of those anatomical differences, were actually related to height effects, not sex differences. And when you were controlling for height, actually those specific sex-specific anatomical differences in the knee disappeared. So this is just to demonstrate that when thinking about sex and gender differences, it really also is not always about finding differences, but it's also about thinking about the complexity that sex and gender differences, I would say, bring to the health research and health phenomenon, and how actually by developing nuanced tools can you be able to better understanding, again, the phenomenon you wanna study and understand. Okay, hopefully I'm clear, because I have a very hard time seeing. Of course, I don't really see anybody or very few of you, but I'm hoping that you're following along. I'm pretty sure you do. That was not a wrong assumption. So how does the CIHR-IGH foster sex and gender health research? So again, as a funding institute, one way that the CIHR-IGH has been supporting is basically by providing funding opportunity to promote for research project that promotes the inclusion of sex and gender, but they have also developed a series of very, I would say, innovative approach. One of them is the inclusion of sex and gender champions, so which is basically scholars who have expertise in sex and gender, and they were asked to join bigger, I would say, funding program or funding projects, and where they could actually develop or help developing a sex and gender lens within bigger calls. So the sex and gender champion is still, I would say, in effect in most funding opportunity. But another very important aspects that I would say really, I'm not going to say sets the IGH apart from other institutes, but definitely it's something that they have done to, I would say, a wide capacity, and it's really pushing capacity building and pushing training opportunity. And I would say, just from my very personal experience, I've been, I would say, doing research that pertain to sex and gender for I would say almost more than a decade now. And I have had a lot of support by this institute, and I have attended, I guess, the second edition of what was the summer school, and I have to say from this, and I guess this was in 2009, or even 8, well, it's a while ago. But I have to say, from the people I met there, the students at that time that I met there, a lot of them have moved on to become scholars, still involved in the sex and gender research, and we are still in a relationship. And so I feel like that is something that the Institute has always excelled in, is trying to put researcher and communication in contact and providing opportunity to grow this discipline and to grow this field in a very collegial and collaborative manner. So, speaking of capacity building, the latest iteration of their initiative to build capacity, well, unsurprisingly, you probably know what it is. It is the IGH Sex and Gender Trainee Network. And now I'm going to stop talking because I'm pretty sure I've talked enough, a good 20 minutes now. So now I'm happy to just leave the floor to Anita, who's going to actually continue the talk and explaining you a bit more of the structure of the trainee network.
Thank you. And you're going to advance the slides for me, right?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, so I'm going to talk about the IGH Sex and Gender Science Trainee Network, of which obviously I'm a part. I want to first say that the photograph that you're looking at, I took this photograph last year in January at UBC because we had a meeting of all of the network that happened at UBC. So that's why I lead with this slide. Okay, next, Annie. Okay, so just to say that the mission statement that was created for this network is that the network is designed or created to build awareness and capacity, as Annie talked about, in sex and gender-based analysis among trainees conducting health research in Canada. So the trainee network is mostly, the meeting would have taken place mostly among graduate students or senior undergraduate students, as well as some professors, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. But when we're talking about trainees, we are really mostly talking about graduate students. So I'm going to explain how this, how building awareness and building capacity takes place within the network. Annie? Who is the network? So I'm going to begin by providing an overview of the network. I'm not sure how to subtly ask you to advance the slides. Okay, so you can see on this map here that there are already 16 chapters of the trainee network, from Dalhousie all the way to UBC, and in fact there may be more chapters by now because this map is a little bit old. So you can see that there is there are a lot of people involved in this network and a lot of universities. Okay. The structure of the network is really designed to facilitate and support capacity building, as I said. So at the center, I guess we would have to say the Institute Director is Dr. Kara Tannenbaum. And Dr. Tannenbaum her work as director is supported by an advisory board. And the advisory board consists of 13 members from all over Canada who all have expertise in sex and gender science. Next one. So supporting Dr. Tannenbaum is the liaison, which is Anne-Cécile Desfay, who, if you can advance a little further, And Cecile coordinates and activities among the nodes, but also communication from the nodes to and from Dr. Tannenbaum. And I think what I was really trying to show graphically here is that all of these relationships take a bidirectional trajectory. So expertise is built within the nodes and shared among the nodes. There's expertise is shared back and forth between the scientific director, also the board. So there's just, it's the way it's set up, there's just so much room for knowledge to be passed around back and forth, as well as so networking takes place here. I show that it's taking place between the nodes and then among the nodes. So the next slide just shows all of the ways that knowledge and capacity building is taking place. So from the advisory board through Dr. Tannenbaum, with the liaison working back and forth between the nodes, and the nodes working very much among themselves, either by themselves or between. So there's just so much room for communication. So then you might be wondering how the nodes are structured. And there are basically 3 roles. We have the senior mentor, we have 1 or more trainee leads, and we have trainees. So it's when I say here 1 or more trainee leads, I'm a trainee lead, and it's really fantastic if we can have more than 1 trainee lead, because generally the trainee leads are graduate students, and of course graduate students graduate eventually, and it's really nice to have some continuity and to share, just to share the work. So I think we'll talk now, we will talk now about the UNBC nodes specifically. Who are these people, the senior mentor, the trainee leads, and the trainees? So Annie is, so Dr. Duchesne is our senior mentor. I am the trainee lead, and as I said, I would really love to have some company in this position. And as far as trainees go, we also would really like to get to know more people who are interested in benefiting from the opportunities that we have nationally as well as at UNBC. So Dr. Duchesne, you're going to introduce yourself as senior mentor, what your role is and what you bring to this, and then I will do the same.
Okay, so thank you, Anita. That's a very great, yeah, that's very clear, and it's a very clear structure so that we understand. And I think, you know, I feel like I'm just gonna second Anita in really saying like how great it is that we have this structure that the Institute has put in place to really facilitate exchange of ideas, exchange of methods, exchange of reflective approach to sex and gender in health research, and really at the graduate level and at the undergraduate level as well. What do you want? You want to exchange ideas, you want to learn more, and you want to do it with people that are interested and share a bit of the same, or challenge you. I think this is very important, and I think this is something that this network can really provide. And yeah. So, okay, so without reiterating exactly what Anita said, but I think it's really important, I'm just gonna talk about why am I a senior mentor, I guess. That's and you are totally entitled to ask this question. And why did I start by putting a picture of my door, especially in times of COVID? First, because I'm nostalgic, I would say. And I can wait to really go back to a stage where there can be a lot of people at my door and we can have a lot of conversations. So in case this is going to change, maybe in the near future, I put this picture. So, you know, my office is at the building 10, the door 3554. And the project I've been doing because I'm lonely, I guess. No, it's also showcasing on my door the books that I've actually inspired me, and the books that my colleagues have read, and the books that have challenged the way I've thought about sex and gender, mostly, not only, but so which I feel in a way, if ever you're passing by UNBC and you're like, oh, what is Annie reading about these days? I guess having a snapshot of my door these days is a good way of getting what I've been reading. And I just want to bring like some, so there's Sexing the Body, which is again a great book by a very seminal author called Anne Fousteau-Sterling, and these are again The Gender Brain by Gina Ripon, The Gender Mosaic by Daphne Joels. These are authors and scholars that I'm in contact and in collaboration with, and specifically what they're doing, these scholars, you see that there's a lot of the brain and the body. Again, as you know from my introduction, I have a background in neuroscience, so of course how I'm thinking about sex and gender has a lot to do with how we think about the brain, although I'm not just interested about that. This is a lot of my interest, and this is a lot of my contribution too. So here I've just basically put some of the publication, the recent publication I had, and I've just basically edited a special issue, which was about bridging gaps between sex and gender in neuroscience. And actually this was a very, to me, was a very interesting endeavor, because it really allowed me to see how variable people position themselves when it comes to the brain, and the notion of difference and where the difference is coming from, especially when we're talking about sex and gender. And this is something I'm thinking a lot. This is something I'm also very critical about. I've really been working a lot with this group, or this other network that I'm happy to bring to this network, which is called the Neurogenderings. And it's a group of feminist scholars and neuroscientists. So I would say this is a big it's a big part of my scholarly interest when it comes to sex and gender. I'm also an experimental researcher, so I think a lot about methodology from a quantitative side of things, and how can we portray some of the sex and gender variables adequately? Where do we need to be critical about them? Where do we need to be cautious about the conclusion we're making? And especially as a neuroendocrinologist looking at the effect of hormones, you need to be particularly cautious, especially if you don't want to have, as we say, over and emphasize a lot about. Finally, something I want to also bring your attention to that I'm actively involved is this, and also I feel that really reflects how globally Canadian research on sex and gender is really at the forefront. Here we have this newly formed organization, the Canadian Organization for Gender and Sex Research, which again, there's not that many organizations dedicated to sex and gender research. I'm part of the executive committee, and I will be chairing the program committee for our inaugural conference. And so, which is to me, I feel a great opportunity again to put me into contact with what is happening in the field of sex and gender. But here, we have health research as part of it, but there's also AI, artificial intelligence, engineering. There's again the how to adopt a sex and gender, I would say, lens or framework goes beyond health research. But so basically, in a nutshell, what would be what's my role as a senior mentor? Well, it's exactly that. So as a mentor, I work with the UNBC chapter to think about possible activity to provide a bit of my network if we want to have a panel or sets of panelists coming in to validate some of the activities, to be invited to discuss elements, to discuss research projects, to discuss research methods. So this is my role. I provide assistant and mentoring support to the trainee that are part of this group and the institution in general. So I think that I've said enough, but I'm happy to answer questions if there are questions afterwards. And now I'm actually gonna again, pass the baton to Anita, who's going to introduce herself.
So this photograph is not like yours at all. So I'll just explain though what it's about. So this is a photograph of me and my dad. I'm in the bow of the canoe, and we were in the summer of 2019, we paddled down the Duchesne River, which is a very special place for my family. It's in Tahltan territory. My dad is an expert canoeist and had been asking me for many, many years to do this trip with him, and I finally succumbed to the pressure. I'm not a canoeist at all, and I probably will never canoe again. But anyway, here I am looking pretty pro. And I think one of the reasons I chose this picture is because though I'm in the bow, I am not leading. And as anyone who canoes knows this, the bow person is not in charge at all. And I think that's kind of the joke, but in a way it's kind of the metaphor for leading as well, is that you might be at the front, but you're kind of doing what it is people need or want you to do, and following instructions. So that's, I guess, how I see my role as a trainee leader. A bit about myself. I got my Bachelor of Science in Psychology at UVic. I did a master's degree in Gender Studies here at UNBC. So I guess from that perspective, you know, I am deeply committed to questions of gender and sex and how they relate to each other. And then now I'm a PhD candidate in social psychology here at UNBC. My interests really are in anything about sexual violence really, and sexual consent. I particularly focus on women's experiences, but I think about other people's experiences as well. I think related to all of these questions around sexual violence is the issue of dehumanization. And that leads me into questions about decolonization. So my interest in decolonization is separate. It's kind of a secondary area that I think about and write about and study about, but there's some overlap there as well. So I feel it's all related. As far as my role as trainee lead, my job is to act as liaison between IGH, the network members, and the senior mentors. I share news from the IGH with the network members. We're required to participate in calls about 3 times a year, lead the network events. So if there's anything happening at UNBC, I would take a role in leading and organizing those things, including things like looking for funding, asking for funding, and that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think that's about it. And I just want to say again, I'd really love it if anyone would like to join me in this role. Or truly, I would. Yeah, and hopefully I've given you enough information that you might ask me a question about this at the end. So now I'm just going to talk about the network, what kind of activities we've done, just to give you a sense of what the benefits are of being part of this network. So first, what's a really important function of this network is networking. So it's kind of obvious, but I have to say, I've talked with Dr. Duchesne about this before, and I, as a graduate student, have really underestimated and undervalued networking. So what I've been learning, and through, particularly at the last IGH national meeting at UBC, really came to see how networking can be so helpful in terms of just getting to know other people who are doing the work in your field. You can, once you know people who have an interest in what it is you're working on, you have a resource. You have somebody you can ask questions to. Certainly at UNBC, we're a small university, and often enough we're doing our work. No one else is doing the kind of work that we're doing, and so we can start to feel kind of isolated. So getting to know people who you can contact, reach out to, is really important. Another thing that would that happens is, as graduate students are getting to know people who are senior to them, professors and researchers, not only would those people become potentially resources, but also you might get a nice PhD position somewhere, or a postdoc, when when people know who you are and the work that you're doing. And so I think that, as a graduate student, when you stand up and talk about your work, sometimes people take notice and you don't know that that's happening. So I think I'm learning the value of networking. There's also a newsletter that comes out, and these are good too, because you can learn about funding opportunities that you would not know about otherwise. You might see calls for papers that really look like they're tailor-made for your work. So these kind of the news, the latest research, it's inspiring, but also can give you some really good opportunities. IGH also provides guidance with funding applications, and I don't know if Dr. Duchesne mentioned it before, but if you're applying to CIHR for funding now, it is mandatory that you talk about how you're accounting for sex and gender in your research, and IGH helps you figure out how to do that. There's also, through the network, there are different learning opportunities. And so I'm just going to talk about there's a new learning opportunity they've just developed, and they developed this because the graduate students, or the trainees at the meeting last year at UBC, said, we need to know more about methods. We need to know more about how to sensitively look at sex and gender with our research methods. And so the IGH responded by coming up with this Meet the Methods series. And so, so far there have been 2 presentations. I attended both of them, and I just want to talk about this second one. What and who is Two-Spirit in health research? So Dr. Pruden at the BC Centre for Disease Control and Dr. Salway at Simon Fraser University talked about this concept of Two-Spirit. And they talked about how as people have got to know this term, how there's been such an uptake of this term Two-Spirit, but how it hasn't always been well understood by regular people. So when they were conducting research, they were gathering demographic data, things like, what is your gender and socioeconomic status, all those things that we ask people. And for gender, they made tick boxes, and one of the tick boxes was Two-Spirit. All right, so there was like straight and bi and all of these tick boxes, and Two-Spirit. And then the next one of the following questions was, tell us, what is your ethnicity? And it would have been, however many they would have put, including Indigenous. So Indigenous was a tick box that followed the question on gender and sexuality that included this term Two-Spirit. And what they got back was that a lot of people identified as Two-Spirit, not so many people identified as Indigenous. So there were more Two-Spirit people in their population than Indigenous people. And that created an issue, that created some questions, because the way Dr. Pruden describes Two-Spirit is that that term reflects a sexual orientation, it reflects gender, and it reflects indigeneity. So in other words, if you're not Indigenous, you can't be Two-Spirit. But because, of course, because this term had become known in the culture, people were claiming that identity when they shouldn't have been. So their research showed that there were a lot of people who identified as Two-Spirit who were not Indigenous. And they said, how can we deal with this? This is incorrect data. It doesn't reflect the population. And so they talked about how they switched it and they asked about people's ethnicity first. And if people indicated that they were Indigenous, then they were led to the question of, are you Two-Spirit? And so then they got a much more accurate counting of their population. That, to me, I was really taken by that. In my research, I asked people about gender as well. And so I've thought a lot about how to ask about gender and how do we break that down, because obviously we have to create categories if we're going to create numbers. So that got me thinking in it, and I just felt it to be a really valuable lesson in thinking about gender and sex in research. So these things that I've just talked about, like the networking and the newsletter and the Meet the Methods series, these all took place within the wider network. But at UNBC specifically, I just want to talk about what we had planned. We are planning a workshop that we're planning to offer next semester, and basically hoping that people would come together to think about what role gender plays in their research and how they might account for that. So kind of springboarding off the talk about Two-Spirit, thinking about how are we going to ask people about gender in a meaningful way? Because as Dr. Duchesne said, perhaps, you know, if we're talking about knee replacements, perhaps we need to be thinking about how tall people are rather than what is their gender. So it really depends on your question, but what role does gender play in my research and how am I going to account for this? And we thought if people could bring their own research and their own ideas, we could workshop that. So I think that is the end of my part of this talk.
Okay, so thank you so much. This is, again, yeah, it really showcased, I feel to me like, again, like I'm always taken, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm missing your mentor, but I wish I was a trainee. It's like a big part of it. But yeah, and also that's something I just want to make clear to all the people who attend. I play the role as a senior mentor, but in my conversation, when I'm learning about sexual objectification, I, as a mentor, I'm always in a position of learning and in a position of expanding. And I think I feel like adopting this position of humility is essential to any scholars. But I feel, especially, I just want to make that clear that my role as a mentor is not to tell you what to do, is to think with you and like with my experience, but also where my questions, where my interrogations are, help you carve maybe your interrogation or help you identifying, where actually gender or possible sex variables could be at play. So yeah, so I think this is probably going to be our first, the first workshop, because I think it's also gonna, I feel it's something and maybe also Anita and I, it's something we like to do a lot. And I think it's something we really are, we're really our researcher to the core. So thinking about this project and thinking about these questions is something that we are both very, very passionate about. Okay, so who could be interested? Now I'm like, who could not be interested? That would be probably my, that's my real question. But let's be a bit more concrete in that, where I would say any students interested in or engage in health research, and I would say undergraduate, graduate, because I feel, especially at UNBC, if I can extend on my experience with my undergraduate, which they're great, and all because we're a smaller school, undergraduate often get a lot of research experience earlier on. So you're getting to your honors years or your final research project year, and you have thought about research, you have been involved and delved into research. So I would say, or you're maybe just interested to witness conversation taking place, and just, so I would say if you're engaged, if you want to be engaged at the undergraduate level, I would recommend you to be part of this network. But if you're a graduate student starting your graduate work, and you're in health research and you're carving your problems, and you may have written a CIHR application where those questions popped, and you may have addressed them, but now you want to think a bit more about them, and you want to actually maybe also engage the entire UNBC community, because that is something also I would say, I'm the senior mentor for that, but there's a lot of amazing resources within UNBC. I'm just like, we're gonna talk about, there's Iowa, but it's broader than health, but it's really, they're doing a lot of activity. There's the Northern Fire, there's the gender program, there's a lot of different places that you can, so as a trainee member, you will actually have the opportunity to maybe create activities or putting all those great resources into a conversation to one another. So if you're interested in critically discussing and disseminating health research, who isn't? Okay, I'm gonna stop saying this because it's, and developing or expanding your network too. And again, I don't wanna, sometimes I'll be very honest, sometimes network sounds kind of a bit catchy, you know, you're like, oh, developing your network, and you like, and maybe again, I'm being very honest here, but literally developing your network of a scholar, but relationship and friendship, it's like you grow as a scholar, you grow as an individual when you're exchanging with other people, and I rarely see drawbacks to this. Like, it's very hard for me to think that what could be a disadvantage of this, especially when it's done in a very, I would say, a good spirit and a spirit of openness, which I think is also part of this network, and definitely I would say the spirit that we want to instill here in this chapter. So yeah, I think that these are definitely, if any of that spark your interest, you should join our training. Also, I will not lie, when you're, you know, if you have ideas, if you have interest, yes, it will come with a bit of a need for organization, definitely with a bit of need of engagement, but I think that again, like, this kind of engagement is something you will gain a lot from, and I think that I would say the cost benefit is probably, you know, you don't have, I think the benefit you will get for the cost that this, that partaking in the network will maybe cost you is definitely not on the negative side of things. Yeah, okay, so again, if you have more questions, more concrete questions, I'm happy to answer them. Nothing comes to mind right now. But I also wanted to end by just talking about what's happening right now. We are currently in the Iowa season. So Inspiring Women Amongst Us is this great organization that has been going and led by Zoe Militis and Annie Boots, but that has grown, and really also, I think, showing how the UNBC spirit and the desire to align academic work with social justice, and I would say also the wealth of everybody. So I encourage you to go and check their schedule, because there's a lot of great activity, and it's actually occurring right now. So this is a little plug I think was worth to put in this talk, because it is relevant. Okay, so I guess that's, unless Anita, you want to add anything? No?
No, it's good. Thank you.
Okay, so then I'm just going to say, oh.
We do have a question, Annie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so from Diana, she asked if the senior mentor and trainee lead positions, are they compensated?
No, they're not. That's a very good question. Thanks, Diana. This is a very, very good question. Yeah. No, they're not compensated. So this is part of like related activities, I would say, but that's a very good question. And I'm very aware of that. And yeah, they're not.
Okay. She's also asked, what entails membership in the node, and will there be monthly meetings or anything like that?
I guess that this is really up to the nodes, and this at this time the nodes is me and Anita. So I would say as more member will come, I think this is, again, I would say, and I can answer, but Anita, you can definitely, there's not a formal structure of like how many activities, how much should there be. I think it needs to be commensurate to people's interest and people's ability to engage. And I'm definitely not gonna, and again, I'm playing the role as the mentor. I'm not playing the role of a boss. Just so that this is very clear. So maybe Anita, you want to add something?
Yeah, I would add to that. I would say that, yeah, you're right. At the moment, we don't have regularly scheduled meetings because it's just the two of us. Yes. But if people are interested in joining, then it can shift dramatically. If we could have if we could compile an email list, for example, then I could communicate with people. We could get together. We could talk about what it is we want to do. We're off, like our thought or our idea for this next term was to offer the workshop. Hopefully people would find that useful and participate. But if people want to be involved sooner than that or have some ideas, I would really love to hear from people, and we can organize whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just as a follow-up, if people are interested in staying informed or hearing more about how they can get involved, what should they do next?
They should email me probably.
Yeah. And we should maybe that's also something we can actually share your email.
Yeah, I actually put it on my intro slide.
Yeah,
but
that's it.
Yeah, so
it's in the slides, but I don't know if will the slides be available? I don't remember how.
Yes, in the next couple of days they will be posted onto our. Yeah,
perfect.
Margot also has a question. She's going to turn on her mic and ask.
Okay.
I might try my camera. I think that's going to work. Anita, thanks so much. It's a really neat initiative to profile, and really nice to get that combination of your expertise and experience in this area, but also how we can fuel these really important conversations for our community. I think it's so I've got I guess points of discussion that we as a health research institute, we're often talking about because we're so small as an institute, as UNBC, we're not talking about big numbers of master's students and big numbers of PhD students, and we're often, as we know, as you're probably aware, there's a lot of really neat researchers working in the HRI as well as research assistants and research associates. So it just seems that there might be a way to think creatively about building the node at UNBC that leverages off the HRI's kind of existing kind of structures, and that you may, I'm not sure if there's some flexibility in the roles, especially for folks. My main question is, as a trainee, do you need to be an active student? And I think UNBC has quite a lot of folks who are finished their masters but working as research assistants, or people that are postdoctoral or even postdoctoral that are wanting to make sure that this work keeps informing them. So yeah, just your thoughts about and I think relatedly, it's that really important question of getting the opportunities out to undergraduate students who we sometimes, we do sometimes struggle to reach with their busy schedules and so on, of coming to sessions like this. So just some sort of thoughts about how we might be able to leverage the existing kind of HRI things to create opportunities, and how dynamic it can be.
Well, I think, thanks Margot for your comments. And am I actually muted?
Nope, we can hear you.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, so no, well, I think to me, and I think that's where, and it's a very bad habit, and I'll and it's probably this kind of bad academic habit to say, oh yeah, let's kind of add on, and you're right that I feel it's very important to think of what is the structure that we already have, and how can we combine structures in an efficient way. I think I cannot agree more, and I agree that while this is the trainee network is coming. Again, kind of, this is a chapter coming from CIHR-IGH that comes with some terms of reference. I'm certain that the notion of the definition of trainee, although referred to students, is not like a strict definition that it needs to be a student. And I think that what an important part of this is that students benefit from that. I think that's why the mandate needs to involve students, but it's not, I would say, restricted or would be limited to student by any means, but it just students need to play a central role in this chapter. That's all. But how to do that, and how I'm happy to, I think Anita and I are definitely happy to meet with Rachel or meet with anybody who's involved in the HRI a bit more to see how this could happen, how could a combination of structure could work. I could not be more happy to do that.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Anita.
No, I was just agreeing that, I second that. I'd be happy to talk with people about how to do this. I think that when you talk about that it needs to, Annie, when you talk about that it needs to benefit the students, I think that's where we see that kind of three level or whatever, three groups of people being involved in the node, which is the mentor, the lead, and the trainees. And I wonder if there's room to open the trainee part to anybody at all, because of course, no matter who's participating in those conversations, then trainee leads who have to be students, they're benefiting. Everybody's benefiting from that.
Yeah.
So I think that there might be some possibilities there.
Yeah, and I think that because what I've found when I work with other contexts that Annie is familiar with in this, bringing sex and gender conversations into terrains of work that might not have normally have sounded like they were a really good fit. Particularly, I'll give an example. I have this multi-institutional course around ecosystem approaches to health. And sex and gender is a really important part of that, but often students haven't even begun to think about the relevance to their work, and they wouldn't even see themselves. So to leap to being a trainee would feel a long way off. But I really like your idea of trying to create some open ways to invite students at different stages of their research careers, and whether it's in the, whether it's in the health research, the honors programs, or into their classes, where they can see, oh, there's actually a really neat way that we can start to think about these things, and those might be future trainees. It's sort of the laddering in on these issues that I think can be a real block for people, that they feel, well, I'm studying the environment, why do I? But actually, it's profoundly important for all parts of. It's not a specialty. It's a real cross-cutting theme, and I think that came through so strongly in what you were talking about. But for a small institution like ours, it's really, and I think my final comment is that in an institution like ours, this actually becomes part of us developing a culture around equity, diversity, and inclusion. So IGH becomes, it's a CIHR program, but it's also helping us to meet these other objectives that we all want to see progress, but we don't necessarily have an opportunity to have yet another separate thing, because we just have, there's so few of us.
Yeah, no, and I could not agree more with you, Margot, on this, and that's also how I like, if I were to, that's how I conceptualize all of this into, and also that for me it all becomes very aligned sometimes.
That's right.
But I would say also, that's why I feel like there's a lot of also, I feel, great work and part of your work, how we think, and that's why I feel like sometimes people and that's why I think they think about sex and gender as finding differences too and finding another layer. But sometimes no, it's not about that. It's really it's definitely adopting it's a framework of how you think. And I would say in that sense, if you're coming from decolonizing or indigenous studies, if you're coming from you also, there's a lot of similarities in how to approach a problem, a health problem or health questions with those in mind. And I would say in that sense, the trainee network is just, to me, another way to align what I think is already a culture present here at UNBC and in health specifically.
I can see Rachel has a question, so I'll turn off my mic. Thanks very much, though.
Yeah.
I was just curious about the strategy for patient-oriented research framework and strategy through CIHR, and if there's been any connections with the Institute, just because sex and gender is a main focus in their phase 2. So for the next 5 years, they're tasking the provincial support units to work with that lens. And so I was wondering, at the national level, are you having those conversations? And if not, I would be interested in connecting you with the provincial conversations.
Well, do you want to answer? Do you have something to say, Anita?
I'm not familiar with what it is you're talking about, Rachel. Sorry.
and I think that's a thing. Like, so if I would say, just to make sure I understand you correctly, Rachel. So you basically are saying that in terms of the patient-oriented research, you mean the agenda for patient-oriented research has put the sex and gender, I would say, lens or framework as the forefront of how they want to move forward. Yeah, no, first, no, I was not aware. and it's, I would say, I think our communication, or the way the network work now, it's like most chapters are, I think that we're not in the place where chapters are talking to one another. So let's say there's the UBC chapter, if I'm referring to that, or the provincial ones. It's more so everybody has been in communication with IGH per se through the different activities. So we haven't had those conversations or how these could be relevant. So yes, I think this could be great if it means that we can have also trainees that are involved in those research projects, just again gaining and thinking about sex and gender more. This is exactly the mandate of this.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we just continue this conversation as phase 2 is in planning right now? But it's not figured out for DC yet, and they're in the process of trying to figure out what that means in terms of developing capacity for patient-oriented research and under the framework of a learning health system. So I think, at least for the North, it'd be great to understand what our stance is on that and where we want to grow in the next 5 years, particularly if we have this node here at UNBC. I think we should look at opportunities to align to CIHR initiatives.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Not against that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a few more minutes. So I'm wondering if there's any students in particular who have any questions that they'd like to ask our 2 speakers. You can feel free to pop your questions in the chat. Or I will ask a general question that I think some students maybe want to know. I'm just wondering if, other than opportunities to get involved in the node, if you were, say, an honor student, and you wanted to start considering sex and gender in your research design, where do you think they should start?
Okay, so well, Anita, I don't know if you want to start, or if you want me to start.
You start.
Okay, so basically, I would say very first is the IGH site itself. As a lot of, like, they have webinars that are dedicated to animal, cellular, then clinical, then populational, which you can do. They need to be updated, again, because this is a field of research, so the research in of itself also evolves and changes, but I think it still is a good, and they have, you know, everything that I showed, for instance, the page where there was about this dozen little questions and project, these are actually case book. So if you're doing something that is related, and I feel there's a lot of variety there, I would recommend just going and read there, because each of them comes with reference, and just to start maybe building on, if you have an interest in the microbiome, if you have interest in the opioid crisis, like just you can start there. And I would say again, the other big to me that I found is a very great resource is called the Gender Innovations, and it's another link that I put in there. And again, these are articulated at different levels. So they have method oriented, they have concept and framework oriented, and then they have like more also even like journalism, if you want to really kind of have more of a summary for people to understand, but you don't want to have maybe too much academic detail. But they have an entire section on health. That's where also I took the example of degendering the knee. But I feel again, it just provides you a great network. And then after that, I would say that is maybe also something that I'm personally trying to work, is building a reading list. So actually a kind of a mini, I have my door, but this is quite, I would say, oriented to my current research interest. But I think in general, that's something I've been wanted to do for a while, and just building a reading list. Or we can do that actually, definitely, Anita, mon Dieu, like, and what we would call like a set of essentials.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would really, I mean, for honors students, I love talking about research, and I love talking about sex and gender. So if you know, if there are honors students or people who are getting ready, thinking about their research and thinking about sex and gender, send me an email. I'd love to hear from people. Yeah,
that's true. I have to say that this kind of goes without saying, but it's true. It is completely true. And I have to say also, like, sometimes it is, I really want to have those conversations, and sometimes time is lacking. So I feel like balancing, maybe having us at one point to meet, plus the resources I just mentioned to start thinking about this. I think this is a good idea. But I have to say, Chelsea, it's also a very good idea that I'm like, okay, yes, this is a very good thing to put together.
It is a great thing to put together. And actually, you know, I just want to back up. I mean, obviously, first, supervisors are the people to talk to about these questions, but also, you know, knowing that there are people on campus like myself and Annie who really, you know, are excited about thinking about sex and gender in research. I am, as trainee lead, very much available to talk to people about that, and hopefully direct them the right, you know, to the good resources. If there were enough, you know, if there were a couple of people who were interested in that, then maybe they would want to ask, you know, help me put together a bit of a workshop or something. We can definitely do that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you. I also send my students to do the sex and gender module on the CIHR website. Yeah. It's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a good place to start, definitely.
Okay, so, Bree, a couple people just posted Anita's email in the chat, so I hope everyone can see it. If you do want to be connected, please feel free to email, you know, any one of us. A lot of us have publicly available email addresses, and we'd be happy to connect you. And if there are no further questions, I will say thank you so much to both of our excellent speakers today, and for bringing this initiative to UNBC. I'm really excited to see it. I'm really excited to encourage all my students to attend, and I look forward to hearing what you do in the future with it.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. And yeah, and again, hopefully we can have a conversation to liaison the HRI together with this initiative. So yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.